As the race for Georgia's governor next year draws closer, only one Democratic candidate has announced a run. It is State Senator Jason Esteves. He threw his name in the hat just yesterday, and political reporter Doug Reardon went one-on-one with Esteves. And Doug, he thinks he has the background to win this race.
He does, Blair, and there's been a lot of speculation as to who may run on the Democratic side and who may not run. In fact, we just learned today that the grandson of former Georgia Governor and U.S. President Jimmy Carter, Jason Carter, who has run before, will not seek another chance at getting to the governor's mansion. His wife is dealing with brain cancer, but that leaves Esteves as now the only declared Democratic candidate for the governor's office. He is an attorney, a former school board member here at APS. He even taught for the district for a while, and he says he has the skill set to make things better here in Georgia. State Senator Jason Esteves became the first Democrat to officially enter the governor's race on Monday. As a former social studies teacher and school board member with Atlanta's public system, education is a top priority for him and always has been.
I made sure that the students were receiving the tools that they needed to succeed, and as a result, we saw record-breaking graduation rates.
Esteves wants to bolster Georgia's pre-K program so kids can get an early jump and parents can have reliable child care. He also wants to improve the state's technical college system. Esteves is also focused on lowering the cost of housing.
We can start tackling the cost of that by ensuring that these foreign corporations that are coming from out of state are not buying up all of our single-family homes.
A restaurant owner himself, Esteves also wants to make sure that the state's small businesses are getting the same advantages big ones are.
If we provided low-interest loans, we would provide people right here in this state with opportunities to create their business, but also grow their business, hire more employees, have a bigger imprint in their neighborhood.
If Esteves were to win, he would be the state's first black and first Latino governor. He'd also be the first Democrat elected to the office since Roy Barnes in 1998. He attributes his penchant for public service to his parents, who often worked multiple jobs to keep their family afloat.
And I've seen the value of hard work, but they also instilled in me the value of giving back to my community.
And while Esteves is the only Democrat to have declared a run, there is another person already in the race. It's Republican Attorney General Chris Carr. He announced back in November. We reached out to Carr today. We didn't hear back, but we're hoping to talk to everyone who enters the gubernatorial race at some point. We're live at the state capitol. Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.